Hello and welcome to another episode of Hollywood Wargaming Unit Reviews for Star Wars Legion. Today we are going to be looking at the Trade Federation's first Special Force unit, and that is the BX Commando Battle Droids. Now, I know a lot of you guys who are probably Clone Wars fans are very excited to see the BX droids show up in this game, as they were pretty mainstay in that series. And while I'm not much of a Clone Wars fan myself, it is pretty cool to see the Trade Federation finally get a trooper unit with a red defense die, and at this point, any new release for the prequel factions is a welcome one. But in our last video, we took a look at the ARC troopers, and we're going to go ahead and see if these BX droids live up as the antonym to those ARC troopers on the battlefield in Star Wars Legion. So let's go ahead and dive right in and take a look at the unit card for the BX series Droid Commandos. And first up, this is going to be a 4-man Special Forces unit, much like the ARC Troopers, but only coming in at 68 points, a little bit cheaper than their ARC Trooper counterparts. And below that 68 points, we're going to see that they have a heavy weapons upgrade, followed by training, comms, an armament, and a grenade upgrade. About what you would expect from a Special Forces droid units. However, I will make a little caveat here saying that ARC Troopers do have a little bit of a benefit for the Special Forces role more so than these guys, as with the ARC Troopers you're not only getting extra gear, but a comm slot that is very rare amongst regular clone troopers. And here, really the only more unique upgrade you're getting is the training and grenade upgrade. And while it is pretty cool to see droids that finally have training, the grenade upgrade isn't always the most viable. And not having a training upgrade really does kind of impede on a Special Forces unit, especially when you consider the amount of dice these guys are going to be rolling. Targeting scopes would be a huge advantage to have on them. But I suppose having gear doesn't really mesh with their droid chassis. And we will jump to the other side of the card to take a look at their other stats, and up here we're going to see that they are droid troopers, meaning they are going to benefit from coordinate bonuses. They do only have 1 health, 2 courage, and a red defense die. Now that is comparable to ARC troopers and Phase 2 clone troopers, and that's more durable than we see in a lot of the CIS faction. But having Courage 2 here isn't the biggest deal because droids don't suffer the effects of suppression, but going from Courage 1 to 2 is very statistically advantageous and very welcome on these guys, as your enemy will have to put 4 suppression tokens on them before seeing any results. After that, we see that they have a Surge to Hit, and Surge to Hit isn't fantastic, but it's very welcome here, especially when you consider that their counterparts don't have any surges at all. It's not end-all be-all, and it's not nearly as nice as a Surge to Crits, but when we look at their attack pool, it's going to be a pretty advantageous benefit to have, and that will essentially be doubling the effectiveness of your white dice. And below that, we see that these guys have a movement speed of 2, which is pretty common for troopers, but with the BX droids, they are pretty nimble and quick. And I wouldn't be shocked if I saw these guys with a speed 3 movements, but I'm not too bitter about them having a speed 2. I think it is somewhat fitting. And there are other keywords that are going to show up on this unit that will exemplify this unit's mobility as represented in the media that you usually see them in. But below that, we're going to see that they have an unarmed melee skill of just 1 black dice, and then a Commando E5 blaster rifle that's going to be range 1 to 3 with 2 white dice. And I gotta say, neither of those are particularly impressive, but having 2 white dice with a Surge to Hit and a 4-man unit means you will be rolling 8 white dice with a Surge to Hits, which isn't terrible overall. And I think if you are just missing the BX battle droids based on the fact that they are simply rolling 2 white dice offensively, I would say you guys should reconsider a little bit, because with 8 dice and a Surge to Hits, you will be getting a surprising amount of hits there, and it could increase your overall chances to get criticals on your enemy. But with that kind of dice pool, you are very much begging for targeting scopes, as it is going to greatly increase the effectiveness of your aim tokens. And it is very unfortunate that they do not get access to that upgrade. So what do I think of the BX battle droids' base stats overall? Well, they are alright. It's a lot of dice on a somewhat durable unit. And while the Trade Federation is used to throwing a lot of dice around, they are very much not used to having a somewhat durable unit. You pretty much have to choose between cardboard B1 battle droids being able to fire at range 3, or plasticard B2 battle droids firing at just range 2. Neither are particularly great, but they do fill their roles in the battlefields, and honestly, compared to B2 battle droids, I think this is a better base stat line. This unit might be twice the cost of a B1 battle droid squad, but they are going to be more durable and will be putting out almost twice the amount of firepower. So I don't think these guys should be wholly discounted just because of their somewhat mediocre baseline stats. They will do quite well in cover, and even if they're not straight out killing enemy units, they will be able to stay alive while you have 4 to 6 other B1 battle droid squads swarm the battlefield and just outright provide more bodies than your enemy can physically destroy. So when you really think about this unit in cohesion with the rest of the Trade Federation army, you can tell that these guys are going to do very well as fire supports, sitting behind cover and holding down positions, while your cheap and flimsy B1 battle droids soak up wounds that would otherwise be delegated on your expensive units. And as far as being a backbone for your troop choices goes, I think these guys are much more beneficial than your B2 super battle droids, as that range 3 base weapon stat will provide a little bit more versatility. But being special forces, they are going to have a slew of keywords that come with them, and we will not understand the full unit's functionality until we look at those. And being droids, they still are going to have an AI protocol here, and for the BX droids, they're going to have AI dodge and AI move. Meaning if they have not been given a face-up order token, their first action must be either a dodge or a move. And really, that's not too terrible. There's only so many actions you can take in Star Wars Legion, and having to choose between 2 if they're not giving a face-up order token isn't the worst in the world. On top of that, for an army that is going to be throwing white dice most of the time, I think AI attack is one of the worst AIs to have, as you will always want an aim token before that. And instead opting to either dodge or move is a pretty preferable outcome. In fact, I would say there are many turns in Star Wars Legion where you will be wanting to make a move action for your trooper choices. And if you really game it right, this AI isn't going to be too much of a detriment on the BX battle droids. But after that AI protocol, we are going to have the Impervious keyword, and basically Impervious allows you to roll extra dice when you're hit by a Pierce attack, equal to that level of Pierce. And this is basically a soft counter to Pierce, as that will cancel one of your defense die, but rolling extra defense die could potentially block it overall, but not nearly as much of a hard counter as something like Immunity Pierce is. And I have to say, one thing that really annoyed me about the ARC Troopers and the BX Battle Droids when I first saw their unit cards was the fact that we were getting such watered down versions of previous keywords. Instead of Immunity Pierce, we got Impervious. Instead of Pierce, we got Lethal. And instead of High Velocity, we had Immunity Deflect. In the long run, I'm okay with these keywords being kind of stopgaps between Immunity Pierce and nothing. But upon their first reveal, I didn't think it was the most exciting keyword. However, when I was recording these unit reviews, I noticed that both units, be it ARC Troopers or the BX Battle Droids, very much benefit from these counters to Pierce. Pierce is very dangerous against elite infantry like clone troopers, which also applies to the BX battle droids, as it will reliably remove models from your small and expensive units, which in turn rapidly depreciates their offensive value. But on the BX battle droids, there is an added value to this Impervious, as we do have a melee build that we can go with them, and if you do want to take these guys up against Jedi, having that soft counter to Pierce is going to help them withstand lightsaber attacks. So while Impervious isn't the most exciting keyword, it is pretty great to have on elite troops, especially if they are going to be going into melee. But after that, we are going to have the Scale keyword, which I hinted at earlier when referencing the high mobility of the BX battle droids. And this exists as a sort of compromise between the ARC Troopers' jetpacks, as this is a built-in advantage allowing them to move over difficult and height terrain without paying the 10 points for the jetpacks that the clones would. However, you are going to have to spend actions to do it still. It's not just a free move over high terrain as the jetpacks are, but I think having that built-in mobility is pretty utilitarian. And if you're aware of and sympathize with my stance on terrain-based upgrades, it's definitely not bad to have that built into the unit's keywords. After all, in Legion, things tend to be a little bit more affordable when they are concrete versus an upgrade. So overall, while it's not flashy and it's not as cool as maybe modeling jetpacks onto your guys, having scale built into these guys' keyword might be pretty effective and come in handy more than one might think. But after that, we are going to have Scout 3, and that is very impressive. I don't think I've seen a unit that has Scout 3 in this game yet. Definitely not for the prequel factions. That means at the beginning of the game, you're going to be able to make a Speed 3 movement with these guys. And if you guys watch my ARC Trooper or my Rex unit review, you'll know how much I emphasize giving them recon intel to bump their Scout 2 all the way up to Scout 3. Starting the game with a Speed 3 movement is quite powerful and very advantageous. And having Scout 3 built into these guys definitely helps mitigate their lack of gear upgrades here. However, I do feel like this unit is worthy of an infiltration ability, and in some ways I do feel like they're a bit hampered by trying to exist as the mirror counter to ARC Troopers. But that's something we'll talk more about later. After the Scout 3 keyword, we are going to have Sharpshooter 1, meaning you will ignore one level of cover when firing at an enemy unit. And this is always a very fantastic keyword, and if you're rolling a handful of white dice, it's also very welcome to have, as the few hits you do score aren't going to be blown away just by hitting on enemy cover. But that is it on the BX Battle Droids keywords here, and I gotta say they are somewhat underwhelming. I mean, just on the tail end here, you are getting just Sharpshooter and not Sharpshooter and Tactical, like the ARC Troopers have. And these guys would greatly benefit from getting aims on the move. And I just don't know if having that natural scale or the keyword built into them is that much advantageous. Also, it seems that FFG kind of incorporates the AI as a keyword, even though it is only a drawback on the units. It is by no means an advantage in any way. And I think that would be fine if the points reflected it, but these guys are not much cheaper than ARC Troopers. And spending 8 points to lose AI and gain Tactical 1 is just a massive advantage. So overall, with the keywords included, I think this unit's card is somewhat middling. It's not super exciting, but I do think it will have a place inside the Trade Federation army, and could work in a lot of CIS lists that need backbones that doesn't want to rely on either Droidicas or B2 battle droids. Because quite frankly, I don't think B2 battle droids can provide the backbone needed. So these will exist as a good alternative to them, and I think they will mesh better with giant hordes of B1 battle droids. But aside from that lack of Tactical 1, my big gripe with this unit is the fact that they do not have a gear upgrade slot, as they would benefit greatly from targeting scopes. But while I do think this unit is somewhat meh overall on its base stats, when you consider it within the context of the CIS army, they actually may prove to be a pretty decent unit. Your B1 battle droids will soak up wounds and provide chaff to distract the enemy. Meanwhile, your heroes will be running in and doing a ton of damage against them, all while your BX battle droids are sitting just a little bit further back, capping out objectives and dishing out some supporting firepower. Again, behind cover, those red dice are very nice, and the fact that you will be able to shoot at range 3 makes them more of a camper unit than B2 battle droids could ever be. So while these guys don't stand up quite as well on paper against the ARC Troopers, I think they might actually fit pretty well into a Trade Federation list, especially if you do plan on running a lot of battle droids, and rely on your hard-hitting heroes to do most of the heavy lifting, while these guys can reliably secure objectives, or just provide a little bit more durable support. But these guys are special forces, meaning they are going to have a whole slew of upgrades, so let's go ahead and take a look at their options. And first up, we are going to have the heavy weapons upgrade, and you're actually getting more options here than the ARC Troopers. Much like the Scout Troopers or Rebel Commandos, these guys are going to have the options to become a sniper unit or a quote-unquote saboteur unit. And I think this kind of trade-off is due to the fact that the clone ARC Troopers get Echo and 5s as upgrade options. And honestly, I think that might be better than some of the options that the Trade Federation has here. But first up, the BX droids do have a very similar sniper here, and that's going to be a sniper with range 1 to 5, 2 red dice, the immune deflect, and lethal 1 for 30-point upgrade. Now, this doesn't have the critical 1 that the DC-15X has, but you are getting 2 red dice rather than a red and a black die, and you do have that built-in surge to hit. So it's definitely a trade-off for this unit, and considering that you have so many white die, I think having the better dice pool here is better than having critical 1 on top of a regular surge to hit. And while I was initially dismissive of this heavy weapons upgrade, I do think this is actually going to prove to be a pretty viable upgrade, especially with some of the builds that we'll look at later that focus on ranged combat. Now, with ARC Troopers, I didn't like the DC-15X quite as much, because it felt like you were paying for that long range, while the rest of your units really wanted to get up close. But with a static 1 to 3 range on all of the BX Battle Droid's weapons, I don't think you're going to need to play these guys quite as aggressively. But without giving too much away, these guys are basically going to have 2 main recommended builds from me, one being focused on ranged combat, and the other focused on being hyper-aggressive, and if you want to go with the ranged combat build, this sniper is going to be a must-take for the units. And when we look at some of the other upgrades that we get down the line, you're going to see that we can make these BX Battle Droids very, very durable, and they will be able to sit behind heavy cover and do pretty impressive amounts of damage at a range. But after that, we have the Dioxis Mine Saboteur, and this is going to be the guy who can plant bombs around the map and then detonate them to do damage to your enemy. And here you are going to be getting 1 Dioxis Mine Saboteur with a range 1 mine attack, sporting 1 black die and 2 white dice. Now that's not a very impressive offensive pool. He is going to have a surge to hit on that, but still, I could see you full on whiffing that kind of roll. And even if you do score 1 or 2 hits, which you likely will be scoring most of the time, that doesn't really leave a very high chance of your enemy suffering a wound from a failed armor save, and then getting the poison keyword inflicted on them. And yes, this is a mine that has the blast and poison 1 keyword, so its main gimmick is going to be relying on getting a hit in and poisoning an enemy units. But I'll be quite frank with you, at 28 points, I don't ever see this model making its points back. Now, you could slap it on some hotly contested objectives or choke points where you think a lot of enemies are going to be piling into, and it could be fun to play in a casual, and I mean very casual game, but for the most part, I think 9 out of 10 games you bring this guy, he's going to be hard-pressed to get that mine going and score enough kills to justify 28 points. I mean, maybe in the future we're going to see some sort of sabotage meta for the CIS where they lace the battlefield with tokens with Cad Bane, Dioxis Mines, and God knows what else. But as things currently stand, this was a massively underwhelming card that we've been waiting on to be revealed before I could make this video and fully understand what the BX droids were capable of. And I think at 28 points, this guy is pretty overcosted. I would have been more understanding of something like 25 points, or maybe even down to like 22 points. But I don't think that these guys are going to be useful unless you field them in numbers, and spending 144 points to get this guy on the field in strike teams really just doesn't seem worth it to me. That being said, poison is an incredibly useful keyword when you're facing off against elite infantry like clones, but keep in mind you still need to get a wound for it to take effect, and with red defensive die and an amplitude of surge tokens, it's going to be pretty hard to do. So overall, this is going to be a hard pass for me on the strike team and the regular droid squad. Which is unfortunate. The Dioxis grenades and having poison later on the map seemed like a very fun mechanic, and compared to Fives and Echo who can go in any squad in the clone army, the droids really could have used something to mirror that a little bit better, even if it was just a really powerful mine. So yeah, very underwhelmed by this card. I think most people are. If there's something I'm missing, as always, leave a comment below. But I think these need to go down significantly in points before they become a viable strategy. If they did, I could see you taking 3 strike teams of these guys and just lacing the battlefield with them. But at 28 points, that's just a big no from me. And that is going to move us along to our training upgrade for the BX Commandos. And this is definitely a unique one for droids. You don't see it show up on droid troopers very often, as they're not typically depicted in this game as the sort of free thought kind of individuals. But first up here, we are going to have duck and cover, something that isn't really going to be of any use on droids, as they do not suffer or benefit from the effects of suppression. That means they don't get cover. And really, that's the whole advantage of this card. If you can't benefit from that, you're literally just putting suppression tokens on yourself and pushing yourself closer to panic. So 100% skip on this card. It's one of those rare overlapping scenarios of rules where it basically hurts you to pay points for this. And after that, we are going to have Hunter, which is always a pretty solid upgrade, but you really gotta think about what you're gonna be targeting here. Always remember that Hunter only triggers when targeting units with wound tokens on them, not units that have just lost a model. So if you're facing off against something like clones, you're not gonna have too many targets where this is gonna trigger off of. And as far as earning the tokens go, I really think you need to be triggering this card more than twice per game to justify its presence on the units. However, if you are taking that sniper, you are going to have range 5, and you are going to be able to reliably target enemy character units. And with the ARC Troopers, we talked about a strike team with a DC 15X being a sort of token generator for your clone troopers, but with this unit and the amount of white dice they are rolling, it is nice to just have aim tokens for themselves. And if your strategy really involves going after Padme and Rex and taking them off the board, or eliminating other heroes, be it Republic, Imperial, or Rebel, this could be a viable upgrade, but it must be taken with that sniper rifle. That being said, there is a melee build we will look at in the future, but I think there's other cards that more clearly benefit that, as melee units will be more interested in getting into combat with whatever unit they can, rather than trying to run around and go right for heroes, who are usually always screened by enemy units. So this is definitely going to be a maybe card for me, but only on a large BX squad that's going to be rolling a lot of white dice. If it's on the strike team, I would go ahead and just ignore Hunter on it. You do have 2 red dice with surge to hits. You're probably not going to be needing that many aim tokens. But after that, we are going to have Tenacity, and for just 4 points, if you are performing a melee attack and you have a wound on you or are missing a model, you will add 1 red die to your attack pool. And this right here, I think, is going to be the card that you take if you're going with a melee build that we're going to look at later with the armaments. Melee units will be taking damage over time, there's no question about that. And having Tenacity on a multi-model units will mean that they're not going to depreciate their offensive value over time. And what I mean by that is if you have a unit that has 4 models, each of those models is going to be rolling 4 black dice in melee. If you lose one of those models, you're only going to be rolling 3. But if you have Tenacity, you will instead gain a red die there. And that means while your health may be dropping, the damage you're putting out is not. So for a mainline BX Battle Droid squad, this is going to be a maybe card for me, being an absolute yes if you're going with a melee build, and a no if you're going with a ranged build. And as far as the strike teams go, I would go ahead and just skip over this one. If you're getting a 2-man strike team into melee, something has likely gone horribly wrong, especially if you have lost 1 model and are relying on Tenacity. And the next card here is going to be Endurance, allowing you to remove a suppression token from this unit at the end of your activation. And while I wouldn't wholly discount this one, it could keep your Droid Commando squad from breaking off the table. It's not too relevant here as you don't suffer the effects of suppression. By the time you get to 3 suppression tokens on 1 unit, you are more or less statistically going to remove at least 1 of those tokens. And if you do reach 4 suppression tokens to the point where these guys would be panicking off the field, you are likely going to be able to save face and roll at least 1 surge or shield. So for 6 points, I think this just isn't really worth the investment, and it's going to be a hard no for me on both the strike team and the full-size BX squad. And next up on the training, we are going to have Overwatch, and for 4 points, you are going to gain Sentinel, increasing your standby range to 1 to 3 instead of just 1 to 2. And overall, I just gotta say I'm not a big fan of standby tokens. I know there's some pretty clever trickery you can do it with clones and their sharing of tokens. And on them, I would maybe recommend this upgrade, but for the BX droids, both Strike Team and Regular, it's going to be a pass for me. But after that, we are going to have Offensive Push, which is going to give you Tactical 1 for an exhaustible 4-point card, meaning you will get an aim token when you exhaust this card on a regular move. And I'm not always the biggest fan of this card because usually it does kind of feel like you are spending 4 points for 1 free aim token. But if you stack this with other exhaustible cards, it does become pretty relevant. And when we look at some of the other upgrades and build options that we have with the BX Battle Droids, we are going to have one of those mass exhaust builds that is going to rely on you recovering pretty frequently. And Offensive Push might actually play in with that pretty well. So this is going to be a big maybe upgrade for these guys. but it is going to rely on the build that you go with, and I think there is one where this might become very, very relevant. However, at half the cost, coming in at 2 points, we have the new Situational Awareness card, which is another pretty big contender for this slot, as it is extremely cheap, and it's going to allow you to spend dodge tokens to cancel critical results. And on a unit with AI dodge, that is pretty effective. And because it's so cheap and pretty much universally usable, Situational Awareness is probably just always going to be a maybe for me. So let me go ahead and just break it down like this. For the BX squad, if you are going with that ranged combat, I would consider either taking Offensive Push or Situational Awareness. If you plan on sitting back and guarding objectives from behind cover, go with Situational Awareness. If you plan on being a little bit more mobile and moving around the battlefield, go ahead and take Offensive Push. But if you know you're the kind of player who's going to be targeting the enemy heroes no matter what, and that is your overall core strategy and how you play this game, maybe go with Hunter instead of either of those two. But it's definitely the last of the three that I would consider taking. And of course, if you are going with that melee build that we'll look at later, I would definitely go with Tenacity here, no question about it. So that leaves us with a pretty wide palette of training upgrades here, and that really demonstrates just how flexible you can equip this unit to alter their presence on the battlefield. But that is going to move us along to the armament upgrade, and this is really where the BX droids start to get interesting. And as I've been saying throughout this video, this is one of the main decisions that's going to determine how these guys play on the battlefield. And whether you wish to equip them with the deflector shields or the vibro swords is going to determine more or less how you play them and how they fit into your list. So for 18 points, we are going to have deflector shields first, and these are going to give you the shielded 2 keyword and recharge 2. That means if you fail any armor saves, you will be able to put them onto those shield tokens, and if you do lose those 2 shields, you can always perform a recovery action and gain those back. And this right here is going to greatly increase the hardiness of this unit, especially if you're keeping them in cover in the backfield, and immediately with that recovery causing you to recharge those 2 shields, we're starting to see a build that is going to be able to make use of exhaustible cards and stack them up to make optimal use out of them. And the fact that this is increasing your durability means you will also have more turns in which you can recover and take recovery actions. And while these deflector shields aren't cheap, I do think they are going to be a very powerful upgrade to be taking on your BX squad and will greatly prolong their presence on the battlefield. So I would absolutely say this is a yes to take on a ranged attack unit. And I'll be honest, this is a pretty universally acceptable upgrade as long as you're not going with the melee build. But that would be a pretty impossible mistake as they are competing for the same upgrade category. And when we look at some of the recommended builds for these guys, this is going to be a mainstay in the ranged attack units. But how about on a strike team? Well, it's a little bit expensive, but honestly, it's still not a terrible idea. And if you're looking to just cram a sniper into your list, but you want them to be able to be a little bit more durable and plan on something like tauntauns or bark speeders getting up in your face, this isn't the worst investment. That being said, usually if you're taking a strike team, it's because you're trying to keep your droids cheap, and this may not be the best way to do that. So it's going to be a maybe on the strike team, with a solid yes on the main units. But as an alternative to the deflector shields, we are going to have the vibro swords coming in at just 6 points, and this is going to give you a melee attack with a red and a white dice and the charge keyword. And that is a pretty fantastic overall buff for a pretty affordable point cost. Charge is a very, very potent keyword and is really the bread and butter for any melee units. Also, with a red and white offensive dice, you are going to be rolling 8 dice with surge to hit. And I think that actually has good potential to be a very, very powerful melee unit. However, with just 4 models in the unit, you are going to need to keep these guys relatively cheap because they are going to be suffering casualties as they sprint across the board, and you also are going to need to take that endurance upgrade to help shore up the loss of dice when you do start taking casualties. And we will see a potential melee build later in this video that I am very excited to look at, because I think you could create a very affordable and aggro offensive unit with these vibro swords. So this is also going to be a yes for me for the main BX droid squad, and whether you want to go with the deflector shields or the vibro swords is really going to determine how you field these guys on the battlefields, but I think both will be very viable upgrades. Unfortunately, as far as modeling these guys go, you are going to have to choose to either build them with one or the other, so please do stick around or fast forward to the video where I discuss my different build suggestions for this unit, as that will hopefully help you decide which of those modeling options will best fit your playstyle. But as far as the strike team goes, I don't think you're going to want to take vibro swords on them. Having just two guys, one of them being a heavy weapons, means going into melee with them would be a pretty reductive strategy, making this a hard pass on the strike team. But with those wrapped up, I hope you guys have a little bit more understanding of where I'm going with these BX Commando droids, as they really do inform how they're going to play. And after that, we are going to move along to the comms upgrade, which is pretty much a mainstay on droid troopers, and right off the bat, we are going to have the comms jammer. And I don't think you have to be too familiar with this channel to know how I am going to feel about this one. On the melee build, this is going to be a very strong yes. With Scout 3, a solid move speed, and scale, you are going to be in your enemy's face, and with those vibro swords, you are going to be constantly closing in and charging into groups of enemy units. So this very much is going to be a yes on the BX droid squad if you go with that melee build. However, if you're going with a range build, absolutely no reason to take this, and on the strike team, I would definitely avoid this also, even if you do end up going with some sort of Dioxys spam upgrade. But next up, we are going to have the long-range comlink, and you guys know how I feel about this one most of the time. There's a few units in the game that might greatly benefit from having that face-up order token regardless of their range. But with this unit having multiple options for that AI, I don't think it's very necessary, and I just don't really see any synergies where paying 5 points for this is really worth it. And that goes for every variant of the unit, including the strike teams. And next up here, we are going to have the HQ uplink. And the synergy here is pretty obvious. If you're taking them ranged with those deflector shields, you are going to be doing a lot of recovery actions, and getting that face-up order token through HQ uplink would probably be justified in that build. So, much like the offensive push card that I mentioned earlier, this is going to be pretty situational on how you plan on playing your ranged BX squad. Do you want them sitting back and guarding objectives behind cover, or do you want them to be mobile and aggressive? If you're going with the former, it might not be a bad idea to just take that AI dodge sometimes, and then make use of something like situational awareness, which will increase your overall durability with a limited amount of points investments. However, if you want these guys advancing around the battlefield behind your main battle line and playing aggressively, taking HQ uplink and allowing them to activate and retaliate first might be the way to go. So this is a very potent maybe for me, and we will take a look at builds that incorporate it later. But I will say this, if you do plan on playing a skirmish match and you know these guys are going to be in range 3 to use their 2 white dice a lot of times, maybe consider taking this so you can ensure that they get an aim token, whether you're playing them aggressively or not. But for the strike team, I think this is going to be a big skip for me. They're a small unit that is only going to be rolling 2 dice with that sniper rifle most of the time, and those are red dice, which really don't need to rely on aim tokens, especially with a surge to hit. And keep in mind, if you really do need to give these guys a face-up order token, you can always make them the end of your daisy chain for your B1 battle droids coordinate. And that is going to move us along to the comms relay, and as always on special forces, for the most part, this is going to be a skip. Comms relay is for units like B1 battle droids that want to hand it over to someone else, not on your very expensive special forces who want to make use of face-up order tokens. And yes, I have said throughout this video that not giving the BX droids face-up order tokens isn't that big of a deal, and you could, in theory, use this to pass up order tokens to another nearby unit, creating a sort of Fugazi coordinate ability. But there's way better ways to do that in the Trade Federation army, and paying points on these guys to do it isn't really the smart move. Basically, it's not the end of the world if they don't get a face-up order token, but you shouldn't pay points and focus on them not getting it. At that point, you are paying extra points for something that is needlessly complex. So yes, this will be a hard skip on both the strike team and the BX battle droid squad. And lastly, we come to a droid trooper unique upgrade, and that is going to be the integrated comms antenna. And I just really haven't found a great use for this one. It's really not cheap enough to sprinkle throughout your army to get a maximum amount of benefits equal to the amount of points that you would invest into it. And if you were to go with some sort of command strategy where you had one B1 battle droid act as a sort of relay hub, I think it would be better off just going with that long-range comm link. So while I do appreciate this unique card for the Trade Federation faction, I really think it's kind of a dud. And I really think they would have to knock it down to 2 or maybe even just 1 point for it to ever be something that I would consider. It's kind of just stuck in this weird niche where it's, do you need a unit with a face-up order token, pay the extra points for long-range comlink, or do you want that sort of army-wide safety blankets thrown onto units of B1 droids that really suffer the more upgrades that they take? So yeah, integrated comms antennas are going to be a hard pass for both the BX squad and the strike team for me. And that is going to wrap up the communications upgrade with very little options that I would recommend here. However, the few options that I do, I think certain builds can make great advantage of them. That being the comms jammer on the melee builds and HQ uplink on your recovering shield units. And lastly, that will bring us to grenades. And while I was pretty enthusiastic about grenades on ARC Troopers, I'm a little bit less excited here, because really with ARC Troopers and their DC blasters, you are very incentivized to get up close to your enemy within range 1 to 2 of them, which could result in a lot of scenarios where having grenades on hand to give you extra keywords is very advantageous. But with the range 3 on the BX Battledroid's blasters, and the fact that they will likely be taking that sniper if they're doing ranged combat, or vibro swords, which will get them into melee, means that you won't have as many scenarios where you will want to pop off grenades. So, to save time on this video, I'm going to go ahead and just say skip every grenade variant for the BX droids and the strike team. With any of the builds I'm going to be recommending, they're just not going to fit in at all, and you're going to be spending points on a luxury that will rarely become relevant in the battle. And maybe if there's a viable Saboteur build, I would consider this, but I don't think there is at the moment with how much that Saboteur costs. So we are just going to breeze right by this upgrade slot and leave it blank for the most part. And with all the upgrades wrapped up, that is going to move us along to my recommended builds. How would I equip a BX Battledroid squad and incorporate them into my list? And to start this off, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of pessimistically dismiss the strike team for these guys. At 50 points, I don't think they're going to be a very good unit. And I do feel like the BX droids got pretty shafted here with their strike teams because the snipers are nowhere near as good as the Imperial or Republic snipers. Lethal 1 and Immune Deflect are so much worse than Pierce 1 and High Velocity. And on the clones, you know what, that's fine because they can use them to generate tokens to share, or use 5s or fire support to combine them in with other units. But the BX droids just don't have that synergy, and I think out of all the factions, they really do have the worst strike teams in the game, especially with the combination of that lethal keyword and their AI protocols, meaning they are either going to have to take upgrades or get a face-up order token in order to even get Pierce. I just find it overall to be very lackluster, and while I do like the profile of that sniper weapon, I think it's really going to benefit from being in a big BX squad, hurling a lot of other white dice at range 3. I've also already gone over my feelings on the Dioxis mines. I just don't think they're viable at their points cost. And even if I were to run 3, I would probably just run the strike teams with just the Dioxis mines, literally no other upgrades, and see how it goes from there. But for the regular BX Commando squad, I do think these guys have a pretty good flexible build for a full-size squad, with 2 viable options for ranged combat and objective capping, and another melee dedicated build on top of that. So first up, let's go ahead and take a look at the more dull of the ranged builds, and that's going to be the one that I call the Objective Humper. And these guys are somewhat self-explanatory. They are going to be sitting on top of objectives, capping them out, and providing ranged fire support from behind cover at a safe distance. And with being less flashy means they will be less expensive, coming in at 118 points. You're going to be taking that BX droid sniper, adding an extra wound and 2 red dice to the units, followed up by situational awareness and deflector shields. And with this build, you're not going to be afraid to be taking that AI dodge token, as these guys will be your late turn reactionary force, who will be able to withstand enemy firepower before activating. And you will be combining that AI dodge with the situational awareness to make best use for this unit, as you ideally hide them behind hard cover. And if they are receiving cover 2, you're not going to be having to take that many wounds onto those shields, meaning you will likely be cycling between taking a recovery action to regenerate those shields, or an aim token every other turn. And really, these guys are going to be putting up a hardy offense or defense depending on which one you go with, and if you time everything right, you're going to be able to put up both. So if you need to save points in your list and you need a solid backbone unit instead of droidicas, this would be a very viable build to throw in there, though I would probably try and include 2 or 3 of these in a list rather than just running one solo. But after that, we are going to have a little more flashy variant of the ranged combatant unit for these BX droids, who I will deem as the ranged offensive build, as these guys will be a little bit more mobile and a little bit more first strike than the other variant that we just saw, who's going to be sitting back and taking dodge tokens. And here you will be taking that BX droid sniper again, followed by offensive push, deflector shields, and HQ uplink. And right away you can see that 3 of those upgrades are going to rely on recovering actions, so while this unit does have the potential to be highly offensive, mobile, and aggressive on the battlefield, you are going to have to play your cards right and time those recoveries properly. Otherwise, you will have 32 points worth of upgrades that are not going to be utilized to the best extent of their ability. So that's about half a unit worth of upgrades put in here, followed up by a heavy weapons model that is going to be 30 points, equaling almost half the cost of the units again. So with all optimization and upgrades considered, this unit is almost going to double its cost, coming in at 130 points. However, I think this will be an incredibly durable, hostile, and effective unit on the tabletop. So if you do plan on running just one BX squad, this might be the way to do it, as they probably will have the greatest impact on the battlefield, so long as you play everything right and put them into the right list. But do note, this is going to require a lot of strategy and timing for those recoveries, and if you don't do those right, this unit will suffer from it. But if you do play them right, I think this will be giving clones a run for their money. But lastly, we are going to have the least expensive loadout here, and that is going to be the melee loadout, coming in at just 83 points, significantly cheaper than both previous ranged options, because you are going to be skipping that heavy weapons upgrade, keeping that blank, and taking tenacity, vibro swords, and comms jammer for just a total of plus 15 points. And I'll be honest, if you're really strapped for points, you can even skip over the comms jammer and just go with tenacity and vibro swords to bring your unit in at just 78 points. And really, the vibro swords and tenacity speak for themselves. I've already mentioned them earlier in the video, and I think having a few squads of these guys run up the battlefield alongside your heroes while B1 battle droids capture the objectives could put some extreme pressure on your enemies. Again, the Trade Federation has a lot of points to spare in their list building for units that sit in that sort of 70 to 90 point range, and I think you could really overwhelm and tar pit your enemies with a few squads of vibro swords. That being said, it is a 4-man unit only, and you will lose some models in melee combat due to unlucky dice. And while tenacity will make up for your first casualty, it will not keep you going as you continue to lose models. And it's worth keeping in mind that these guys are not that mobile. Yes, they have Scout 3 and Scale, but at 2 movement speed, you are really going to need to play your angles right and get that charge off with the maximum amount of movements you can make. So I'm not exactly sure how viable this will be on the battlefield, and I do feel that some of the ranged options you can take with these guys might be the safer bet here. So when building the BX battle droids, I would probably recommend going with the shields over the vibro swords, unless you really want to use melee units in your army, and potentially support and or distract your enemies from firing at your heroes like Count Dooku, Grievous, or soon-to-be Darth Maul. But those are going to be my 3 main recommended builds for the BX battle droids. However, I will make note that these guys might be pretty decent if you just run them completely bare bones. In fact, much like the ARC Troopers, if you run 3 BX battle droid squads completely bare bones, I think it actually could create a pretty viable support to the rest of your army. Again, this unit is throwing double the dice of a B1 squad with red defense die, and I think just bare bone fielding them in numbers could actually be pretty effective on the battlefield. Sure, it's not exciting and those upgrade slots are very tempting, But sometimes the quality of your units and models just don't beat the sheer numerical value of them, and that is very much an ideology that applies to the Trade Federation faction. So with my recommended list builds out of the way, what do I think about the BX battle droids as a unit overall? Well, I do appreciate their flexibility, however, the fact that they need to be modeled one way or the other does kind of irk me. I'm very much a WYSIWYG kind of wargamer, so while they are a very flexible unit on paper due to their upgrades, you likely are only really going to be taking one of those most of the time, as your models will be built around it. However, I do believe that taking one or two of these units with that sniper and shield configuration is going to be a very solid backbone to a Trade Federation list, one that's not going to require as much finesse as something like the Droidicas would, and I think they will be an overall more forgiving unit to new CIS players, as they are going to be very durable, and will give you a little bit more overall board presence as the match drags on. And while they might look a little underwhelming compared to the ARC Troopers, I think they do fit in well with the CIS faction to exist as a stopgap between your very expensive heroes and your fragile B1 infantry units. So for the regular BX Battle Droid squad, I am going to be giving them a B-. For most of the time, I was leaning towards more of a C+, but these guys are pretty affordable, and having 3 squads of them throwing a lot of dice and absorbing hits with those deflector shields is going to be a pretty tough nut to crack. However, I really can't say the same for the strike team on these guys. You don't get the advantages that synergize with the clones, as mentioned earlier, and really that's the only thing that made the ARC Trooper strike team relevant, and you're just not getting that here with the strike team. It's basically just a nerfed version of the Scout Trooper and Rebel Sniper, and I'm really just not a fan of how that's going to synergize with the AI keyword. And on top of that, the Dioxis Grenade Mine is, in my opinion, vastly overcosted and not that impressive. So the strike team actually is going to be an F for me. I just don't really think they're going to have a place to fit in with the Trade Federation army, and it kind of feels like you're just paying 50 points for 2 red dice. But if you disagree and you think I'm being too negative on them, or if there's something that I'm missing out on here, please do leave a comment below explaining your reasons. It still is red dice and a mostly white dice army, so maybe it's welcome on that behalf. But personally, I'm not a very big fan of the strike teams. And honestly, overall, I'm not exactly sure if I'm going to be picking up the BX battle droids. While I do think fielding a full squad will be a good thing to keep in your arsenal, I'm actually not a huge fan of the models themselves. They have somewhat of that cartoony aesthetic, and the people at FFG have spoke about how it is somewhat difficult to translate those animated characters into actual 3-dimensional models. And I think it really does show on these guys, and a lot of their poses just don't seem that great. They look a little goofy and even kind of dated. I mean, this is a bit of an extreme comparison, but it does remind me of some of those old Warhammer models where they're trying to do some crazy hero pose and it just doesn't quite capture it properly. But I do really like the idea of those deflector shields, and it's kind of funny that while this game is bringing in the clear acrylic pieces, Warhammer 40k just removed them from their entire Necron line. A bit of irony that I find humorous there. But again, maybe I'm being a little bit unfair, and perhaps when the community gets their hands on these models, they'll be able to do some cool paint jobs and poses that will change my stance on how these guys look. So if you're a CIS main, I would probably pick up a box of these guys. However, as a guy who plays 2 armies, I'm definitely going to be skipping over these guys and saving my dollars for the ARC Troopers. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you agree with my overall assessment on this unit? If not, explain your reasoning in your comments. And if you liked the video, consider leaving a like, consider subscribing if you want to see more content like this, and then turning on the notification also. And as always, take care.